The Word of Elohim is like a hammer to the rock. This message is entitled The Fallacy of Following the Rabbinic Calendar for the Sake of Being in Unity with Our Jewish Brothers. The Bible calls us to be instant in season and out of season, and be ready to exhort, to rebuke, to teach, whenever and wherever Word of Elohim instructs us to teach. So we are here in our Zoom meeting. Adjust my camera here. Hallelujah. It's a Shabbat, and we are in the interregnum, the period between Yom Teruah, the Day of Trumpets, and the Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippurim. And so the subject came up on our Zoom meeting here, Congregation Elim Online. And as I've said many times, anybody that's out there listening to this and would like to join a fellowship on Shabbat, you don't have a local congregation to go to, you are welcome to email me and inquire about it. Website hoshanarabah.org. You find contact information there. I'll ask you a couple questions. Basically, I want to hear your testimony of how you came to faith in Yeshua and your interest in the Torah. And then if everything is kosher, that is, you're not a wolf in sheep's clothing, then we will be happy to welcome you into our fellowship here. Anyway, about 3 days ago, we celebrated Yom Teruah, and the end of this week, we will be celebrating, that is the end of the coming week, this coming Friday, Yom HaKippur. Yom Kippur or Yom HaKippurim is the technical Bible term. So the question on our Zoom meeting came up, not the question, but the discussion about the rabbinic calendar. And now, as those of you know, our ministry and our congregation is on the visible sighted new moon calendar, which is from which the months are calculated, and the biblical calendar is based on, and then the biblical feast days go off of. And I have lots of information on our website about that. The other main calendar, other than all of these Johnny-come-lately calendars, the astronomical conjunction calendar, the Zadok calendar, the this calendar, the that calendar, the Enoch calendar, there's no end to it. These are all Johnny-come-latelys. But the main dispute or question is between the ancient, and this is well documented, well verified, both in secular and in biblical literature, that this is what the ancient Israelites did. We can prove this again and again and again from archaeology, from the writings of the Jewish sages, as well as from the Bible. The visible new moon calendar. But the other calendar, the alternative calendar, is the rabbinic calendar, which is what the modern Orthodox Jews follow to this day. That calendar came about in about 325 AD by Hillel II, who was a Jewish sage, not the same as Hillel I, who lived in the time of, he died during the youth of Yeshua the Messiah. But Hillel II lived during the time of Constantine, and this calendar was approved by Emperor Constantine. It was to replace the biblical new moon calendar, because the Jews were not able to get to Israel, and then if those that were there weren't able to get the information out as to when to celebrate the biblical feast. So it was an effort to try to follow the biblical calendar. And to this day, it purports to go off of the new moon, which is proof that originally They knew that the visible new moon was the focal point, the sign, the OT, O-W-T, the visible sign, and that's the biblical word for it, that was to be used to calculate the months. The problem with that was from 325 AD to 2025 AD, that calendar has gotten off, usually by a day or two, sometimes more. So the question at hand is, do we follow the rabbinic calendar or do we follow the new moon calendar? There are many people, and I would say well-meaning people, in the Messianic movement, the Hebrew roots movement, that follow the rabbinic calendar. Now, I was born into this movement. My family came into this movement in the early 1950s, and that's the only calendar we knew. And so I followed that calendar until I was about 40 years old, and I learned about the new moon calendar. And I studied it. At first I rejected it, but I studied it in the year 2000, so that's 25 years ago. And I realized that it was backed up biblically. And so my family and I and the congregation that I was pastoring, we moved to that calendar and have been on it ever since. However, we know many people that are on the rabbinic calendar. And when you ask them, why are you following the Jewish sages when you know that the calendar is off by several days? In fact, this year, they were celebrating Yom Teruah, which is the first day of the 7th month. They were celebrating, I think it was a day early. So it was the wrong day. The moon was dark. It was not even yet visible from Israel. It was visible the next day. And that's the day that we celebrated it. And it was spotted by people in Israel. And then it was broadcast. So many people say, well, we want to be in unity with our Jewish brothers. We want Israel to be in unity. So we follow the rabbinic calendar. Now the Jews follow it because, that is, the rabbinic Jews follow it because, well, there is technically no Sanhedrin to tell them when to keep the calendar, or when the new moon is sighted, and which days are the feasts. The Sanhedrin ceased to exist basically with the destruction of the temple. I think some vestiges of it continued on, and some say that the Hillel II calendar was the last decision that whatever remnants of the Sanhedrin were left, that were officiating in the Roman Empire, that was the last official decision. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But that's what the Jews claim. That's what I have read and heard, at least. So why are we following the rabbinic Jews? Why are we following the rabbinic Jews and their calendar that is off when we have this, the Bible, the Word of Elohim, to tell us how to sight the new moon and when to calculate the feasts? Why do we need the rabbinic Jews who are in error on this issue? Now, let me ask you, people say, well, I want to be in alignment. I want to be in agreement. I hear this all the time with the Jews. Why would we want to be in alignment? I want to be in alignment with my brother Judah too. But why would I want to be in alignment with them when they are in error? When they are going against the Bible? I mean, if we're going to be in alignment with them on that, why don't we just get in alignment with them on, well, they don't believe Yeshua is the Messiah? How about that one? Where do we stop being in alignment with things that are off or against the Bible and get on track with the Bible. You can't say, well, I want to be in alignment with the Jews, so I'm going to follow their calendar that is off of the biblical calendar, but I'm not going to agree with them about Yeshua not being the Messiah. You can't have it both ways. That's picking and choosing. And not only that, Exodus 23 says, you shall not follow a crowd to do evil. Okay, I understand the context here. This is referring to judicial legal matters. About, perverting justice and how you treat the stranger and the poor and that kind of thing. But there's a remez here. There is a hint. We're not to follow a crowd to do evil. And the word evil there, it can also be translated as error or bad. It's a very generic Hebrew word. It's the word ra. And it just means anything that's contrary to the truth. So it can be false doctrines or false teachings as well. But this is a Torah command. Do not follow the crowd. Follow Yah. Follow his Torah. And I will go even one step further. Yeshua, and we can prove this, he took the authority away from the Sanhedrin in his day because it was a system that was corrupt, and he came against it because they rejected him as the Messiah. And he gave the authority to his 12 disciples. He said, whatever you bind in heaven is bound on earth. Whatever you loose in heaven is loosed on earth. He gave them authority, legal authority, to make declarations, to make legal halakha. He said that heaven would honor that. And that's exactly what the Sanhedrin did with regard to when they cited the new moon and determined the dates for the feast days for that particular year. People would come in to Jerusalem who had seen the new moon. You can go back and read this in the Mishnah. I have it up here on my library. You can read it. And they would examine the eyewitnesses who had seen the new moon and make sure that they had multiple witnesses that agreed and it was verified. And then they would make pronouncements as to the dates. And Yah honored that. Whatever is bound on earth is bound in heaven. And Yeshua gave that authority to the apostles. And then to the church leaders, go read Matthew 18. Isn't that beautiful? So Yeshua himself. And then in Acts 15, the first Jerusalem council, decisions and delineations were made. And Yah honored that by the apostles there in Jerusalem. So yes, the oracles were given to the Jews, as Paul says in the book of Romans. What are the oracles? This. Yah used the Jews to transmit and transcribe the scriptures. And he inspired the Israelites and then the Jews who wrote the New Testament, the Jewish disciples. And they were given the oracles, and Peter, James, and John, along with Paul, canonized the New Testament, not the Catholic Church. They just accepted what had already been given, the imprimatur of heaven through the apostles, as prophesied by Yeshua and Isaiah, and also in the Psalms. That's a whole other discussion, that the New Testament would come along. Or technically, we call it the testimony of Yeshua. That's the term that the New Testament uses to call itself not the New Testament, but the testimony of Yeshua. So yes, the oracles were given to the Jews, but not doctrine that is to the rabbinic Jews. Doctrine is based on the scriptures and based on the disciples of Yeshua in the testimony of Yeshua. So the rabbinic Jews do not set doctrine or halakha. The Word of Elohim trumps that. So that's why we do not follow the rabbinic calendar. I want to be in agreement with my brothers, the Jews, but not if they are going against the Word of Elohim. They are the ones that have to become congruous and in alignment with Elohim. I don't have to come in alignment with them, and I don't have to come under man's authority when it goes against Scripture. And isn't that what Paul said? Or Peter said there when they were drugged before the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts. He said, you be the judge as to whether we should follow you or follow Elohim. But we're going to follow Elohim. And that is our mandate. And those of you that are following the rabbinic calendar, I don't judge you. I know that you are probably well-intentioned, but you are wrong. You are in error. You are going against the Word of Elohim to the degree that the rabbinic calendar is in disagreement with the Word of Elohim. And you therefore have set up a little idol called Rabbinic Judaism, a little idol. And you're following that and acquiescing to that, rather than over Yehovah Elohim and the Word. I know that's a hard word, but that is the fact. I'm not your judge. The Word of Elohim is our judge. I'm just the messenger. Amen.